Hi, this is Dan Korver, pastor here at Dalton Hill Baptist Church. We're a small Baptist church located in Owasso, Oklahoma. We're small enough to know you, but we're big enough to serve you and for you to serve as well. Our vision is to rescue, restore, and return to service. Rescue a non-believer or a believer who has been hurt or is lost, restoring them to Christ in fellowship with other believers with the desire that they in turn will help others along their way.
We've been doing like I said, the series on different heroes and villains. And do you realize there's over 3,000 people named in the Bible? I can't cover them all, okay? Some of them are only given just their names, all that's mentioned. But there are a lot of people in Scripture. And so today I'd like to basically, how would you like to follow a legend? It's not easy to follow a legend. I can tell you from personal experience. How would you like to follow Bear Bryant? Who followed Bear Bryant as coach of Alabama? Ray Perkins won a national title, but it wasn't good enough. Not easy. Not easy to follow Barry Switzer. How'd you like to follow Vince Lombardi? You only have the Super Bowl trophy named after him. It's not easy to follow. You have Red Auerbach, obviously, if you know anything about the Boston Celtics, the number of crowns that he won as a coach. Very difficult to follow. How about Tom Elliff at Eastwood? You know, the exciting Eastwood. How would you like to be the guy that came in after him? Different personality and very difficult. Or how would you like to follow Charles Spurgeon? Great orator of England, great speaker. Very difficult to follow. Today, when we look at it, the person we want to look at, actually, he followed a person who is mentioned after his death, the one who he's mentioned in the New Testament 30 times, 900 years after his death. I mean, quite well known. In fact, most consider him the greatest prophet of the Old Testament. You remember when Jesus came, a lot of people said, "Are you Elijah?" No. At the crucifixion, they said, he's crying out to Elijah. Transfiguration with Elijah. So how'd you like to be Elisha and come after him? So when I look at Elisha, and obviously we aren't going to cover all of it because there's quite a bit about him. What I want to think about is following a legend by creating your own legacy and trusting God. I think that's key for any of us. You follow a legend, you create your own legacy by trusting in God. Personally, I followed a legend. Both are in the Hall of Fame. How'd you like to follow them? They forgot more about basketball than I ever did. You know, very hard. Same thing when I went to teach. I kept hearing, well, so-and-so didn't do it that way. And I had to stop. I'm not so-and-so, okay? You know, it's not easy. It's not easy. So the legend, let's look about it, how to follow a legend. Look over in 2 Kings chapter 2. We're going to be looking at him, Elisha. And I think a lot of times when we see these things, we don't ever stop and really evaluate some of them. But then we'll start in verse 1, we'll read verse 1, verse 3, and then also in verse 5. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 1. It came about when the Lord was about to take up Elijah by a whirlwind to heaven, that Elijah went with Elisha to Gilgal. Verse 3. The sons of the prophets who were at Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that the Lord will take away your master from over you today?" He said, "Yes, I know, be still." Verse 5, the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho approached Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that the Lord will take away your master from over you today?" He answered, "Yes, I know, and be still." Now, first of all, is that of a discipleship program. You'll notice in each one of the cities there were apprenticed sons of the prophet. And Elijah, when he would go to those cities, would help to develop them. So that Elijah can only be in one place, but he had prophets. Elisha was one of them. The difference is Elisha traveled with him. The others would stay, having family or whatever it might be. I think it's important when you look at it in development. You have the same thing in 2 Timothy 2 and verse 2. You remember Paul says to Timothy what? The things you've heard and seen in me, teach to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So when Elijah taught Elisha, he was then supposed to teach and to do it to others. So what you all are being taught today, who are you giving it to? And I'll never forget, I've told you many times, we need to be fat people, faithful, available, and teachable. You need all three of those. So you notice Paul took Timothy, Barnabas took Paul, Paul took Silas. They all had different people they developed and were so much of the New Testament, Titus and so on. So first of all, when you think about it, we need to look at, following a legend, apprentice program. You need to get into apprentice programs. Part of why we have Sunday school, we have all this. That's an apprentice program, actually, to do that. Also, I want you to think about the background in which he comes onto the scene. Who is the king? Ahab and Jezebel. That's who I really want to go there. Don't you? You have a divided kingdom. They also were worshiping Baal. So how many of you would like to come onto a scene like that? Second thing, notice in verse 2, you see verse 2, verse 4, and verse 6. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." Remember, they're in Gilgal, so now they're going to go to Bethel. How far is that away? Okay, I think it's important. We just read those in Scripture, and we don't think about it. Okay, anywhere from 16 to 20 miles. Okay, so notice in verse 2 that Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. Notice in verse 4, Elijah said to Elisha, "Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to go to Jericho." How far is Jericho away? 12 miles. Hey, how many of you get a little tired of this? That was just nice, smooth, paved roads, everything's level. He said, "As the Lord lives and as yourself live, I will not leave." So they came to Jericho. Verse 6. Then Elijah said to him, "Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he said, "As the Lord lives and yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. So think about it. Was he determined? I'm not leaving you, I'm staying with you. 20 miles, 12 miles, 6 miles. And how many of you wonder what's going on? We just barely got here. Why are we leaving now? If you really want to follow the Lord, how determined are we? Why does God ask us to pray? Does he not know that we need things? Why does he keep asking us? It shows our dependency on him. How many of you had little kids and they'd want a toy, and after a while you learned real quick, you don't buy it right away. Because they may want it today and they may not want it tomorrow. You'll notice then, so he had a discipleship apprentice program, but he also was very, very determined. But he also had a dream. Notice, I think it's interesting of what he wanted to do. So notice starting in so they get to the Jordan, and you'll notice verse 7. Now 50 men of the sons of the prophets went and stood opposite them at the distance, while the two of them, talking Elijah and Elisha, stood by the Jordan. Elijah took his mantle and folded it together and struck the water. And they were divided there and here, so they went across on dry ground. You think about it, that'd be quite a miracle, wouldn't it? Any river that's flowing and it stops flowing, it's not going to be dry when you go across it. So not only do they part the water, but God immediately dries it. Otherwise it'd be a muddle. And you notice they go on dry ground. It came about when they had crossed over, Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken away." And Elisha said, "Please let a double portion of your spirit be upon me." And he said, "You have asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if not, it shall not be so." Now what's he mean, this double portion? A lot of people are saying, well, Elisha did twice as many miracles. That's recorded, that's true. That's not what he's asking for. What does it mean to be a double portion in Deuteronomy? Who gets a double portion in inheritance?
Firstborn.
Firstborn, the replacement. So he is asking what? I want to be your replacement. There's many sons of prophets. But he says, a dream, I want to take your place. Now, how do you want to take a place? What did you just see him do? I mean, he just parted the water, right? I mean, you know, hey, I want to follow you. He has a dream. That's what I want to do. I want to be a follower. But notice then Elijah says it's not for me to give. It's for God to give. And if you're there and God allows the cloak to come on you, then you will be the chosen. Now, when you think about it, what dream do you have that you feel like God's asking you to do or wanting you to do? It's an important thing to be thinking about. But He wants to do it. You notice, I think it's interesting too, then you go a little bit further, notice in verse 11 down to 13, it came about as they were going along talking that, behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire which separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by whirlwind into heaven. So how did Elijah go up?
On a whirlwind.
Whirlwind, but usually people say he was taken up loud by a chariot. Now it's interesting, if you keep reading, you'll see why. Elisha saw it and cried out, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. And he saw him no more. Then he took a hold of his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. He also took up the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and he turned and stood by the banks of the Jordan. Okay, when he calls out, and he says about Elijah, he says a chariot and horses. What's the most prominent military weapon of that day?
Chariot and horse.
Chariot and horses. And so he makes that description of Elijah. Who is the strongest person in Israel? Elijah. Chariot and horse. We just lost the most powerful man in Israel. How would you like to replace the most powerful, most important man in Israel? I don't think we give Elisha enough credit. Okay, so now you asked to take his place, and God has granted and given you the mantle. It's easy to talk about walking by faith. It's something totally different to do it. So notice he's going to demonstrate his faith. Notice in verse 13, we already saw, he comes to the Jordan River. Now remember, they crossed over, how? Elijah struck the water. I've now got his mantle. Lord, if you're really with me, I'm going to strike the water. And what's going to happen? It's going to part, and I'm going on dry land. And you'll notice you have 50 prophets, sons of prophets, that are standing on the other side watching. So when he goes and he strikes it, what's he doing? The waters part. It's showing Elisha that you are the replacement. It's showing the sons of the prophets you are the replacement. But how many of us pray for something, but we won't step out on faith? That would be quite something. It's easy to watch others do it. It's totally different to do it yourself. Totally different. I mean, how many of us would have started off with a little one, a little miracle that nobody else could see? So notice he's doing that. You notice also, if you jump down, so he demonstrates his faith, and also within the own leaders. But notice when he gets over to chapter 2 and verse 19, the men of the city, okay, now remember, that was 6 miles away, roughly 6 to 10. So now they're at the Jordan River, and now they go back to the city. We don't think about all the walking that they did. So they're at Jericho, and notice in 19, the men of the city said to Elisha, okay, you're the replacement? All right, we're going to present a need to you. Behold, now the situation of the city is pleasant, as my Lord sees, but the water is bad and the land is unfruitful. All right, we don't have good drinking water and the land is not producing. Now, why would that be such a challenge to Elijah? What god are they worshiping? Baal. And what is God noted for?
Didn't like Baal.
Okay, fertility, the soils, and so on. So you think about it, when you have that, and also that of rain. Hey, your God hasn't delivered. Now how are you going to have enough faith? Notice what he does then. He says, bring me a new jar, put salt in it. If you put salt in water and pour it out on the ground, what's going to happen?
It'll kill the vegetation.
Going to kill the vegetation. He pours it in the well, and instead of making it worse, it does what?
Purifies
It purifies it. Therefore, they know what? God is greater than Baal, because he did something that calling out to Baal could not do. So you think about it. Does he demonstrate his faith? I want the job. All right, I'm walking by faith. I part the waters, they can see it. I help out the people. And you notice it's interesting, he meets them where they're at. This is our need. All right, let's go to God, let's meet the need each time. Notice you're also aware you're doing something for the Lord. I think it's important to know you're going to have doubters. You're going to have doubters. You'll notice in verse 15 you're going to have doubters within. 16 to 18, you'll notice the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho opposite said, the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha, and they came to meet him and bowed down. And notice in 16, behold, now there are with you servants 50 strong men. Please let them go and search for the master. Perhaps the spirit is taking him. Now, if you remember, this happened. You remember with Obadiah, who was the servant of Ahab. Whenever they get close to Elijah to kill him, God would actually take him up and move him somewhere else. Now Elisha had said God took him to heaven. And they're saying, no, God picked him up but just moved him somewhere else. In other words, you have power, but Elijah, he still must be around. So for 3 days, they go looking for him. By the way, you'll notice that Elisha is waiting in Jericho. He didn't go. Because he knows the truth and he believes it. And notice in verse 18, they returned to him while he was staying at Jericho, and he said to them, did I not say to you, don't go? Hey, you're not going to find him, he's not there. God took him home. But they had to find out for themselves. You also have others that are going to doubt. You notice in 23, and he's going to Bethel. You remember that's that journey backwards again. Remember they had main cities that the prophet would go to, the different cities. So they're now making a trek back another 12 miles or so back up the road. And so this is organized opposition. Because if you're going on a road, what's the chances of you having 50, 20, 30-year-olds waiting along the roadside? In a city is one thing. So notice what it says in verse 23. He went up from there to Bethel, and as he was going up, young lads, the word there would be for young men, not like they're teenagers, came out from the city mocking him and said to him, go up, you bald head, go up, you bald head. In other words, hey, you said Elijah was taken up? Yeah, right. I'm going to really believe that. And, to be bald was a sign of, dishonor. So they're saying, we don't believe you. We don't believe you went up in dishonor. We don't believe you're the replacement. And it's, obviously it's organized, probably Baal worshippers, but it's organized because you have that many men that are on a roadside and he's going up. You're not going to have that many people organized, walking. So notice what he does. Talk about Elisha. And he looked behind and saw them. He cursed them in the name of the Lord. 2 female bears came out of the woods and tore up 42 lads of their number. So notice it was a much larger number than that. Notice, is he demonstrating the power? It's of God. 2 bears come down, take care of 42 of them. I might think twice about calling him names. How about you? But his word is going to be going out. But opposition will come. You'll have opposition within. We never did it that way before. We don't, whatever it might be. So you think about it. Here you have, he went through discipleship, meaning through training. He was determined. He wasn't going to stay behind. I'm going to stay with Elijah the whole time. He also had a dream. Hey, I really want to take your place. All that responsibility. But then also, as soon as he did, he demonstrated his faith. The very first chance he got, only way he could part it is with God's help. And he trusted God to do that. You have the doubters. I think, how many of you have any doubters today? Anybody have any doubters? You can't do that, whatever it might be. But I want you to notice in chapter 4, He also desires others to walk by faith. How many of us want others to walk by faith? Elisha could have solved this differently, but he wants this widow and her 2 children to walk by faith, because all of us need to walk by faith. Notice in chapter 4 and verse 1, now a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets, so notice the prophets were could be married, and they are of the city, and you notice that your servant my husband is dead. You know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves. So obviously they had borrowed money or whatever it might be, and they owe, and if you can't pay, the way they would take it, they'd take your children, and you then would be slaves, their children would be slaves until the debt was paid off. They had the right to do that. Now, they weren't supposed to be loaning money to fellow believers at interest and so on, but needless to say, as a creditor, they could do that. Now, what are you going to do if you're Elisha? You know, it's a real need, and I think it's interesting. Walk by faith. You know, that's what he does, and we're going to see this. You've heard this story repeated at least twice, Old Testament, New Testament. Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" She said, "Your maidservant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil." And remember, Elijah did that earlier, and you're going to find that later in the New Testament as well. Notice what he says. Now, remember, if you are the woman, and you have a son and probably a daughter, because it just mentions son singular, what would you do? Notice what he says. Go borrow vessels at large for yourself from all your neighbors. So you have a little jar of oil, and it says go borrow all the large vessels from all your neighbors you can think of. What are you thinking? Seriously, what would you be thinking? What do I need a bunch of large jars of vessels? The one I have wouldn't even fit in one. Notice what he says. Even empty vessels, do not get a few. Get a bunch of them. You shall go in, shut the door behind you. Notice actually it's 2 sons, and your sons, and pour out it shall all these vessels, and you shall set aside what is full. So you're going to take a jar that you have, all you have is oil, start pouring it in one. It gets full, then you do what? You go to the next one. You go to the next one. How many vessels would you get?
How many ever you collected?
How many ever you collected? How big is your faith? How big is your faith to go collect it? He could walk by faith, and he could solve the problem. He wants them to walk by faith to solve the problem. Notice then, it came about in verse 6, when the vessels were full, that she said to her son, "Bring me another vessel." And he said to her, "There is not one more vessel." And the oil stopped. If there had been 10 more, what would have happened?
It'd have been filled.
So if they'd brought 100 more, what could have happened?
Filled them up.
So they could only go as far as their faith would take it. Notice it was their faith. How many of us are limiting God? And notice Elisha wanted them to walk by faith. Otherwise, he could only be in one place. He wanted them to see, trust in God, and do what you're told to do. I think it's interesting when you look at God could have provided just through Elisha, but he chose for them to trust in God. Another one you have is to meet people where they're at and take them to another. In chapter 8, you'll notice chapter 4 and verse 8, he leaves there, and you notice he meets the Shulamite woman. And we know the story of the Shulamite woman quite well. And you'll notice, like in verse 9, she said to her husband, "Behold, now I perceive that the holy man of God passes by us continually." So he's going between cities. He's making this regularly. And she wants to now provide a place for him to stay, which would be basically a waterproof room on top. The roofs would be flat. That's building him a house, so when he comes by, he has a place where he can rest. So they do that. And then notice in verse 12, and he wants to now reward her. In verse 13, he asked his servant and so on, what can we do for her? And she basically says, hey, I like it where I am. I don't need anything. There's nothing you can do. So he asked his servant. Notice in verse 14, the servant. He said to him, what then is to be done for her? And the servant answers, truly she has no son, and her husband is old. Notice he said to call her. And when he called her, she stood in the doorway, and he said, at this season next year you shall embrace a son. She said, no, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant. The thing about it, how would you like me, Elijah? We can't do anything for her, but she's never had a son. In that day and age, and it's true in some parts of the world even today, if you don't have a child, it is really, you look down upon. Husband's old or beyond childbearing years and says, oh, next year, you're going to have a child. Now, is that walk of faith on Elisha's part? Very much so. Very much so. And so notice then the following year she conceives and bears a son. And notice that he's roughly about 12. He's out in the field with his father, and apparently he has a heat stroke and dies. Now how would you be feeling if you're the mother? You never could have a son. God gives you a son. He's about 12 and he dies. That's why she basically gets upset. And also, let's look at it. Notice then she puts him inside. Verse 22, she calls her husband, please send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and return. All right, he's dead. Why would she go to see Elisha? And notice he said, why will you go to him today? It's neither new moon nor the Sabbath. So in other words, what kind of spiritual man is her husband? Only time you do it is during the festivals and just during the rituals. Not really much of a spiritual leader. Notice what she says. She said, it will be well. Was she a woman of faith?
Yes.
It will be well. Now, that's amazing when you think about it. He's dead. You now have to go all the way to get him and come all the way back with Elisha. You notice, verse 24, she saddled a donkey and said to her servant, drive and go forward. Do not slow down the pace for me unless I take. What kind of ride is that going to be? And how old is she going to be by now? I mean, this is just really nice paved roads, right? You think about it. She now gets there and she is coming, and you notice in 25, Elisha sees her from a distance and says, go see what she wants. She's coming. And notice in verse 26, please run now to meet her and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, what?
Wow.
It is well. Is it well with your child? So how could she answer that way? Meet people where they're at and take them where you want them to go. He's meeting her. So notice in verse, it's interesting, what happens is, in 27, basically, Elisha now says, let her alone, for her soul is troubled within her, and the Lord has hidden it from me and not told me. She is troubled in spirit, and I don't know what it is. Let me find out. Leave her alone. Then notice then, she basically is very blunt. Did I ask for a son? No. And you have given me a son, and now you've taken it, the Lord's taken it from me. Very painful. And notice then, he now tells his servant, Elisha tells his servant to take his staff and go and lay it on him. So he goes out ahead of him and gets there before they do. Why would he want the staff to be put on? When they get there, the staff has done nothing. Why then would he tell them to do that? How many times, and you look at Old Testament history, with Moses and so on, were they giving tribute to the staff and not to God and so on? So the staff is not going to save the child. He then gets there, he enters and shuts the door, and you'll notice it's through prayer. It's through prayer of Elisha, a prayer of faith, that brings him back to life. But if she hadn't have gone to Elisha, would he have ever prayed the prayer? How many of us never see a miracle because we never go to ask for a miracle? And there could be a lot of different ones. So notice, I think it's interesting when you look at it, and there's so many more that you're going to have with Elisha, because there's twice as many miracles that he did and recorded. But is he creating his own legacy? There's needs. He goes to God, and he helps them go to God, and they meet the needs of the people at the time. And I think that's what's so important for all of us. You know, do we really want something? Do I really want to do something for the Lord? Then it's going to cost something. Am I willing to pay the price? And you think about it, that's quite a price that he paid. And if Ahab was trying to kill Elijah, do you think Ahab might be trying to kill you? You got problems from opposition from within, you'll have opposition without. You just keep serving the Lord. So if you want to follow a legend, or if you are following, to create your own by trusting God. And he'll show you what to do.
We'd love for you to come and visit with us and fellowship with us. We're located at 8263 North Owasso Expressway, which is on the east side of Highway 169 North, between 76th and 86th Street North. We have coffee and fellowship from 8:30 to 9 Sundays, followed by Sunday school for all ages from 9 to 9:45, and our Sunday morning worship service is from 10 to 11. We likewise have a Wednesday night service for all ages from 7 to 8. Now may the Lord of peace himself give you peace at all times, and in every way the Lord be with you all the time.